Risk management fundamentals. Well, we're really going to tackle three key areas in risk management, and that's to do with identification, analysis, and evaluation. We're going to start basically with some definitions, and in terms of definitions, there are some important ones that we need to cover. The first one is, of course, talking about safety, hazard, and risk. But safety, what does safety actually mean? Safety is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as a condition of being safe from injury or loss. You're screaming at me saying, whoopee-doo, you know, what a revelation. Well, it's not really, is it? I mean, you knew all along. But let's talk a little bit more about hazard then. So what is a hazard? Well, a hazard can be defined as something that has the potential to cause you harm. Okay, fine, safety, hazard. What about risk? Risk is defined as the likelihood of a hazard causing the harm. So we need to think about hazard and risk. A hazard, as I said, is something that has the potential to harm you, whereas a risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing a harm. The big question, of course, is on risk management fundamentals, and it's the elephant in the room, is what exactly is risk management? Well, let's take a helicopter view. Many of you will be familiar with ISO 31000. It describes risk management as coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. First thing that comes to the mind is, well, how do you do these coordinated activities? In the world of risk management, when you talk about coordinated activities, you're really, in essence, looking at risk assessments. But how? Every time you ask a question, it leads to another question. The question on how you do risk assessments is pivotal. Let's talk about risk assessments. Go back to our old friend, ISO 31000. And in there, there's a definition. And risk assessment is defined as the overall process of risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. So let's pick on that first one, risk identification. Let's look at what it actually means, and let's understand a bit more about it. Our friend again, ISO 31000, defines risk identification as a process of finding, recognizing, and describing risks. That risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing a harm. So we now got this challenge of finding, recognizing, and describing risks. But we then said, well, we had hazards, and we need to go through a process of looking at hazard, which is something that has a potential to cause you harm, and feeding it into risks. Risks, of course, being the likelihood of a hazard causing the harm. You might have seen this picture, and if you work in a place like this, I've got one piece of advice: leave. Because I think there is a lot of things that are wrong in this picture from a hazard perspective. Notice I use the word hazard perspective because it's about something that can cause you harm. Hazards is something that has the potential to cause you harm. Here's a lady. She's cutting planks of wood on a circular saw. Well, we know what the hazards are. Something that can cause you harm there. Chop the fingers. She's standing on some wires. There's trip hazards. And in fact, you can go through all of these various bits and pieces, and in your own time, you can cherry pick them. So this is a slide that I said is a very famous slide. And the interesting one is number 4, in the sense that you've got a person there smoking. There's a no smoking sign. Well, stood next to flammables. Keep that picture in mind. Keep that picture in mind, and number 2 in mind, where the gentleman there is just about to walk into a hook hanging down, and he's not wearing his safety helmet. Those pictures are important because they'll come a bit later on, and I'll remind you anyway. There are 5 clear things there in terms of hazards, what can cause you harm, but the question still remains, what is the likelihood of that consequence? In other words, what is the likelihood of someone slipping on some water on the floor, or that individual walking into the hook, or that person dropping the drum? So there's all those chances that we need to look at in a little bit more detail if we're going to make a meaningful conversation of going from hazards to risks. That was the identification piece. It's really straightforward because we had a picture, and in your organization, when you walk around, you have issues that are going on, and you'd say, I know what the hazards are, but I'm always looking at the chances. What is the probability of those things happening? So the first piece is fairly straightforward in terms of risk management fundamentals, identification. So I hope